As the clock ticks. Prologue. The year was 3012 when computer programs were implemented in nearly all facets of people's everyday lives. These programs were nicknamed perks and lifts, and they gave people special abilities or benefits. Lifts were more powerful or weaponized than perks. These lifts, without extensive licensure and fees, were reserved for the government and the military. For every program event, there was a unique ID that could be traced back to the program's creator and user. Lifts and perks programs were invented all the time. Patents were required for each program and were required to meet specific regulations. Computer hacking took on a whole new meaning. The hacktivists were notorious for being politically motivated and were unfortunately capable of exploiting programs. One group became a mysterious cybercrime syndicate. The United States Data Enforcement Corps, DEC, was formed, and right before the world almost ceased to exist. Part 1. The Time Wars. Frank Stewart, asked the DMV office receptionist. Frank Stewart, a man of 30 years old, was renewing his vehicle registration. Morning, how are you? Asked politely. Good, and yourself? Yeah, thanks, I'm good. Frank's voice was cut off when he noticed the breaking news on the TV. He looked at his phone, which was also ringing. It was a data enforcer he was shadowing, Nate Frederick. Hello? Frank, we need you at the office. New developments, big ones. Frank noticed more details of the news story and stuttered back through the phone. Okay, I'm on my way. The news was encompassing developments about this nameless group of cybercriminals. Suspicions that a time control lift existed became the group's focus, to slow down or speed up time using lifts. Their perpetually changing membership status was hard to follow. The most widely available programs were perks. Perks complemented a person's strengths and weaknesses. The physiological change was barely noticeable, yet they yielded improved results. Illnesses became obsolete following extensive medical research and milestone technological advancements. Mental illness and psychosis were the initial focus of expert studies. Cancer was a thing of the past. Lifts were highly exclusive and secretive. They included time travel, brief immortality, and other advanced abilities. Frank started heading to the office. The registration could wait. Frank was a recruit for the DEC. He was an entry-level data enforcer who worked to stop infamous hackers from hacking programs and engaging in cybercrime. All programs were privatized, prevented from entering governments by the sheer manpower involved. As he went through the intersection in downtown New York City, Frank heard tires screech, and that was the last thing he remembered before a car hit his Ford Focus going over 100 miles per hour. They struck the passenger side, saving Frank's life. He awoke in the hospital after a good smirch and called 911 from the roadside. The doctor greeted him as he woke up in the hospital. Hey there, you're awake. How are you feeling? Okay, Frank trailed off. You're lucky to be alive. Your car was like a crumbled soda can. They must have been going fast. Amazingly, you haven't a scratch on you, although you suffered a concussion and lost consciousness. There's a detective here to ask you questions. Is that okay? Yes, Frank said groggily. There was a knock at the open door. Can I come in? Frank nodded. Hi, I'm Detective Smith with NYPD. I understand you were in a vehicle crash. I am sorry. I just need to ask you a few questions about what happened. First, do you have a description of the vehicle that hit you? The DEC recruit paused and said, No, not at all. I was completely blindsided. I also understand you are a data enforcer. I will be honest with you. We think you were hit by someone who hacked a program to speed up his car by controlling time. Otherwise, there is no way with all the turns he could have done that much damage at normal speeds. I am preparing a report for your supervisor, actually. I needed to fill in the blanks of everything about how programs, specifically lifts, are hacked. Here's the important part. We think this group is a highly trained splinter cell of Anonymous. Can you help? Asked the detective. Yes, of course, said Frank as he awakened more quickly. Perfect, I will have it sent to your email. If there was a person who knew about hacking computer programs, it was Frank Stewart. His forte was in programming. He clicked open his email. Greetings, Mr. Stewart. I know with your expertise we can stop them. As you may have guessed, the penultimate goal is gaining access to nuclear weapons. I can be your eyes and ears as much as possible, but you need to point us in the right direction. What are we looking for? The guys in cyber here at NYPD are right. Without a unique ID on the programs, this quest becomes damn near impossible. Is there a back door? And one last question, recruit. Understandably, this cell could be huge, not in terms of size, but danger. Think of how peaceful it's been since 9/11 and the coronavirus pandemic. And given the hands-off nature of background checks for a lift, some powerful lifts fell into the wrong hands. They seem to have a basic understanding of time travel lifts. Some enemy attacks have countered time travel. Check out the attachment on this email. Do you want this program? S. Attached was a link to download a new lift. It was an advanced time control program. Frank knew time travel was fraught with temporal anomalies. These resulted from manipulating the fabric of space-time. Wearing special eye contacts incorporated a time control interface into his field of view. There were more programs in Frank's arsenal which he developed himself and with his colleagues. New Genesis created time control lifts and was known for supplying government agencies and the military with the most cutting-edge programs. They began their research on molecular structure and their lifespan. The relationship between time and space was dependent on each other, and every molecule needed time to function. Symbiosis of space-time had predictability, but it was not certain. Space represented the first three dimensions, and the fourth dimension represented time. The program reorganized the time traveler's molecules by creating very small vibrations in surrounding matter. The first time control event happened soon after him downloading. Computer programs were stored in microscopic memory chips implanted next to a connection in the arm. Then a peripheral-like contacts allowed you to interface. Suddenly, the window in his office exploded, sending glass fragments everywhere. The rattle of machine gun fire echoed ominously as his surroundings were shattered into pieces. He hid behind the desk, enabled the time control lift, and slid the X-axis far to the left. He blinked and landed in the DEC bunker. Recruits, stat enforcers, and leaders surrounded him but were not paying attention to him. "Hello?" he said. "Oh, thank goodness you made it, Frank. We were about to start without you. Take a seat," said the recruit to his left with a smile. Frank sat down and looked up to the speaker. The general of the DEC, Drew Carville, was standing at the podium. Red and amber lights flashed around the room. Drew tapped the microphone and cleared his throat. "Welcome. Let's be straight to the point. This is an emergency meeting called to address the recent attack on our facility. Fortunately, no one was seriously hurt, but this was too close of a call. We will be increasing security of the campus and vicinity. For now, all operations will be conducted in the emergency bunker. I want recruits to team up with an enforcer, and leaders follow me to the conference room." The team split up, and Frank followed Nate Frederick, an experienced enforcer, to the computer room. Frank thought about his reply to the NYPD detective. "Hello, Detective. I assure you I can answer your questions. Please bear with me as I'm still recuperating from the crash. We're looking for missing unique IDs that are sort of a watermark security feature for all programs. It not being there is pretty indicative of mischief. For backdoors, there are a couple. We can brute force attack them with certain parameters, while overclocking our servers. This means they will try every possible password in a short amount of time. The hard part will be collating this information and keeping it usable. I have an idea, though. I can modify the time control lift and erase programs in the past before any attacks takes place. On a final note, I accept your program and will download it immediately. Thank you for your help, and I'll update you on my progress. Frank." Elite cells of Anonymous attacked relentlessly, using time travel to speed up bullets, cars, and projectiles to make kinetic energy central to their attacks. Many casualties were suffered, and much was destroyed. This austere environment paved the way for a beeline to a thermonuclear apocalypse. At this point, the struggle became known as the Time Wars. 5 years earlier, Frank snuck back into the office and slid into his office chair. No one around him was aware that he was from the future. He was starting to feel much better since the crash and was quickly learning the ropes of time travel. Frank focused on pausing time, the fourth dimension, while he also opened a brute force attack program. Simultaneously, he overclocked the servers to the maximum. Frank thought time control was essentially like controlling his mind, or practicing meditation. He sank deeper into the chair, the blur of password combinations being tried flicking across the screen. It was important to pause time because the bad guys would notice their programs being erased and possibly retaliate. Then his phone rang, and the computer beeped once, showing a progress bar of 100%. It was Detective Schmidt. "Hey, Detective, how may I help you? Are you back in time? I'm here, and things are going well. I got every illegal program erased. What do you want me to do now?" "Encrypt it and make sure there are no back doors. You got it?" "Yeah, no problem. Back in a jiff." Present day. Frank arrived next to the enforcer who was training him. They talked about the mission and how it went. Frank explained to Nate the intricacies of pausing time and how focusing was important for him. Anthrax was found woven into the bullets fired at the DEC. Upon this discovery, the team donned CBRN, chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear suits that dropped from the ceiling. It was quickly decided that they should use the sewage system to escape. They opened the manhole cover in the basement, dropped into the septic tank, and made it outside. Giant swaths of fire and smoke billowed from over half of the city. Windows were non-existent, blown to bits. Cars laid upside down all over the street. The anonymous group had planted incendiary devices across the city. People milled out into the streets, crying, and some on fire. Immediately, the team dispersed and rushed to the aid of the burned victims. Frank fought back, breaking down from his emotional state. "Sir, we've got news for you," Urkru said. "We have another threat with a countdown sequence, 12 hours from now, and they're targeting our nuclear weapon caches. Are you okay?" Frank had a fainting problem and was caught after fainting by the recruit he was talking to. He woke in a helicopter. Data Enforcement Corps Command, DECOM, organized a citywide evacuation thanks to National Guard helicopters to take everyone to safety. They landed in a wheat field northwest of Albany and erected medical tents for the wounded. Some did not survive, and others were on life support after suffering severe third-degree burns. A field communications center was set up, allowing Frank and his team to begin their cleanup of New York. Mr. Stewart was a man of ingenuity and had a near-perfect plan in a very imperfect time. He gathered first responders, DC enforcers, and National Guard troops. There was a broadcast from the president, who had a heartfelt and reassuring tone in her voice. "Hello and good afternoon, my fellow Americans. Today marks the epicenter of a terrorist attack organized by Anonymous. To those no longer with us and their families, you have my deepest condolences, and will be remembered for years to come. I'm enacting a temporary martial law to be the front line combating this threat. I will make sure our nation is free from threats and back to its previous and unblemished glory. Thank you." The team was cobbled together and left the base to extinguish the city. Giant fire helicopters rode away across the sky into the smoke plume and dumped water in a grid pattern. Soon the buildings and streets were put out. There were several goals left: to contain the anthrax and to rescue hostages being held captive. "All right, fan out. 50-meter spread. And make sure you get steady coverage," said a firefighter. Spraying for anthrax was quite the predicament. Even coverage with anti-biological spray foam was important to absorb the bad stuff. Also important was to avoid ripping the specialized suit and to not remove the gas mask. Working their way across NYC, they hit anthrax hotspots. The location of the hotspots was gathered by the intelligence branch of the DEC. Soon enough, almost the entire city was coated with the foam. Further testing of the environment showed no signs of anthrax. Next on the list was to rescue the hostages. The Empire State Building was discovered to be housing over 600 hostages spread throughout every level of the building. Bad guys were sprinkled atop the roof. They descended via rappel line from a helicopter above the building. They touched down on the rooftop and there was a standoff between the two sides. Guillermo Sanchez, an infamous anonymous leader, grabbed Frank's wife, who was being held hostage. He put his gun to her head, but he and his posse were greatly outnumbered. "Give it up, Sanchez. You're outnumbered and in the wrong," yelled Frank. "Never," he yelled back. Just then, a sniper landed a perfect headshot on Sanchez, right between the eyes. Mr. Stewart screamed and ran to Frank, covered in blood. The others surrendered their weapons and put their hands behind their heads. Part 2. Attrition. Frank knew that wars were over via a top-secret message to DECOM from the Pentagon that nuclear weapons control had been reclaimed. A hunt was on for these anonymous leaders. Authorities in the intelligence branch claimed responsibility for this investigation. They were able to identify the majority of hackers and gather information about them. The Data Enforcement Corps sometimes faced the obscene, search terms and images very graphic in nature. Anonymous and those affiliated became declared a terrorist organization because of their vicious attacks. Nate Frederick found the first lead on the most wanted anonymous leader. This person and their posse were caught on video planting incendiary devices in New York City, proving suspicions of their part in the Time Wars. The next phase following the war was mainly peacekeeping. Thanks to the new DEC field unit and one specially equipped to travel time, Anonymous and its affiliates were backed into a corner. Mr. Frank Stewart was elected to a leadership role based on his background and expertise. The explosion sent steel wrenching as the wall of a hacker stand in Beijing split open. Concrete crumbled away like an avalanche. The DEC unit had placed C4 along the side of the immense fortified wall and paused time during the explosion. This gave the effect of a slow-moving destruction. Clad in Nomex of fire-retardant cloth, the team hustled in through a wall of fiber and rubble. It was so difficult to avoid the rebar twisting into the narrow passage. Many suffered lacerations. Charging forward nonetheless, it appeared that they had entered through the kitchen area. There were dozens of people interrupted, frozen in time, sitting and eating their lunch. A siren was audible, and there were lights flashing. The thunder of footsteps grew louder as an armed throng of anonymous members could be seen entering through the office room. The team was not entirely surprised to confirm that the enemies could circumvent time travel. The situation became only more difficult since it took such immense focus for Frank to pause time. "Take cover." Frank took cover and ducked as a suppressed volley of rounds flew over his head from AK-47s. Nate and the team pressed a button on their arms and deployed large bulletproof shields, making sort of a turtle shell shape on the defensive. Clank. The shields cracked at concrete as they hit the floor. The anonymous team ceased firing to avoid lethal ricochets. Frank stepped forward, his shield in front of him, and used a megaphone on his shield to broadcast his voice. "Listen to me. We can end this peacefully. We can go our separate ways if you guys agree to stop hacking programs." A disheveled anonymous member piped up, "The bosses upstairs will not like this. We have executive orders from the DEC. How about turning over a new leaf?" The anonymous misfits looked at each other, shrugging and talking quietly. Frank enabled an additional time pause, and their enemies froze. It was essentially like time traveling while time traveling. Hours of time deeper into the abyss, the plot thickened. Frank's attention and thoughts started to wander. Time rifts encircling the atmosphere were undulating and holographic. Data enforcers quickly bound the frozen anonymous team in thin cables designed to tighten and become more uncomfortable when tampered with. Taking off towards the stairwell in the office, they decided to enter a vent halfway up the stairs. Everyone turned on a night vision lift and made their way through a labyrinth of vents. They came upon an anonymous leader's quarters. A stealthy approach was necessary for this part of the mission. The most minute sound would be amplified by the metal fragile walls. A conversation could barely be heard from the small grill in front of them. Sighing, Frank neared his breaking point as he realized he needed to pause time, yet again. He enabled the time control lift as a voice bellowed from below. "I don't care if they can time travel. But sir, do not but sir me again. This is a cakewalk for rookies. Hack faster." The anonymous leader was cut off by Frank's third time pausing the clock. Mr. Stewart was moving sluggishly. Nate motioned to drop in a hurry due to Frank's questionable state. The grill was kicked in by a recruit and the team descended on their frozen prey. Frank hesitated and fell, rappelling down into the room, breaking his left leg in 5 places. It was a high drop. Ropes trailed behind them and were just short of the floor. Then all hell broke loose. The time pauses dissolved due to Frank losing consciousness after going into shock. He lay there sprawled out on the floor, and the anonymous leaders unfroze and looked confused by their surroundings. They realized what was happening and drew their weapons. The elite data enforcement corps deployed shields once again, and the enemies dropped their weapons, except for one, who held a detonator in his hand. Nate then noticed a shattered wall covered in blinking explosives. Nate made a hand signal pointing up with his left pointer finger. Nate's accomplices nodded, knowing what that meant. Although the enemy's plan of attack was somewhat ingenious because of a dead man switch detonator, they were outsmarted. A dead man switch will detonate from releasing a switch or button, so even if the one holding it dies, whatever is being detonated will still detonate. The move by DEC was only to be used in the direst of circumstances. Each enforcer, even Frank, who was fighting regaining consciousness, activated their brief immortality lift and hoped for the best. Nate pulled the limping Frank up to his feet and brushed him off gently. Fortunately, the terrorist cell knew nothing about immortality lifts, giving way to a straightforward surprise attack. "Last call, buddy. Deactivate it now and you can live," yelled Nate. "No can do, my friend," replied the anonymous conspirator. Giving off the fiery glow of invincibility, Nate quickly took aim at his opponent and landed 3 shots to the chest and 1 shot to the head. They ducked behind some desks and their vision became pure white as the giant bomb exploded. The immortal DEC team watched their opponents in the building vaporize into nothing. The team's brief mortality came to an end and blast waves rolled out across Beijing in front of them. Frank was life-flighted to a nearby embassy where the rest of the team met him. As they struggled to get past the reporters outside, military police made a hole wide enough in the crowd for the Corps to get through. Frank was offloaded from the stretcher and placed in a surgery room. The doctor attending to him offered a couple of choices. One, he could have the broken bones set immediately and see an enormously faster recovery time with advanced medical perks. Or he could rely on the perks to get him through his injury, which would take nearly 10 times the amount of time to heal. Frank yelped in pain as the broken bones more closely resembled their natural order. "Ah, quit your whining, it's not that bad," said the doctor smartly. Back at the Data Enforcement Center, the friendly support group roared and applauded their approval of the field unit as they entered. Frank came in on a wheelchair with his leg bandaged expertly. "Congratulations, that win must feel good," cheered Drew Carville. "Can I get an amen? Woo, what a show," yelled another supporter. "Cheers for the Data Enforcement Corps." The packed lobby erupted with applause and cheering. Small talk about the mission broke out, and Drew was keen on talking to Frank and Nate. "So," he began, "you had me convinced from the start, Frank. Good job. I gotta hand it to you. With these results, the world is a better place. And Nate, those moves were wildly impressive. You'll make a great field agent. On behalf of DECCOM, we thank you," he said with a warm smile. Frank slid into his bed covers and slept for 19 hours. His wife woke him with a gentle side hug on the bed. She kissed him on the back softly and held a cup of black coffee in his direction. "Morning, thanks," he said as he gripped the mug. He took a sip and sat up, pulling his leg up with his other hand. "You're welcome, sweetie," Bernice Stewart cooed into his ear. "What did I miss? Are the kids here?" Frank asked. It was school time, but Bernice reassured him that the kids were safe and up studying. She went on to explain and elaborated on her disapproval of him sneaking in last night. They lived in a rural area of New York, with a speedy drive to the office for Frank, and a pleasant view of the mountainside for the Stewarts. "Since the Time Wars, you have been a ghost. How could you not know we have been homeschooling? And I mean, I can handle it being a teacher, but come on now. I expect a little support here and there. I have not seen you in 12 days, and then you sneak into bed beside me without saying a word. You're lucky I was not awake then. I was just missing you so..." Frank kissed her. "I'm sorry, but I know now, okay? I understand. You have been doing such an amazing job with Sam and Lionel. I would like to hear more about their studies. I am curious. Also, when did you get so beautiful?" "I've always been beautiful, thank you, though. And they're doing well. Sam likes his 5th grade math, and Lionel is going all out writing at the 12th grade level. Honey, do you realize our kids are both 3 grades ahead of their class? They're borderline obsessed with getting good grades," Bernice said, smiling. "That's awesome, Burr. I'm not surprised. We have taught them well," Frank whispered back, hugging her tight. The next few days were paradise on Earth. Great parades with people from every walk of life joined in celebrating peacefully in the Time War's aftermath. There was a recurring news story that was DECOM's most recent claim to fame. The story was titled "TEC Fake News: Gas Leak in a Beijing Cement Factory." The Corps had the media wrapped around their finger. They knew the ins and outs of pulling strings to make cover stories which masked the reality of nightmarish incidents following the war. The story became peaceful, though, for a while, until midnight struck on August 31st, 3012, and a sinister September rolled in. Since spring 3012, anonymous efforts were greatly curtailed by what became known as the US DECCTTF, Data Enforcement Corps Counterterrorism Task Force. Once the cyber attack was successful on the Beijing Anonymous HQ, all computer programs, perks, and lifts became outlawed. This was due to gross negligence in governing these programs. Experts agreed that should the programs continue, a doomsday scenario was almost certain. So data enforcers spent weeks using thermite to sink through every master perk and lift on a plethora of hard drives. This rendered every program ever created useless. However, this was an ultimatum since all related research was destroyed. Making sure all backdoors to re-implement programming were sealed, data enforcers sent computer viruses to each perk and every lift worldwide. Doing so did not affect the users, and surgery to remove the subdermal arm connector was provided free of charge. Thanks to pharmaceutical companies who caught the attention of most people wanting to optimize their healthcare, a vaccine was developed to modulate the efficacy of healthcare perks. The program vaccine, it was called, was developed by New Genesis. It mimicked neurotransmitters like oxytocin to combat stress and anxiety, and even improved mood. Memories were remembered more easily, and nightmares were forgotten. It had regenerative and anti-carcinogenic properties, too. Small cuts and bruises were instantly healed by getting proteins in the body. Anything besides a major injury or a chronic illness could be erased with nothing more than a shot. The Stewarts were offered first grabs at the shot because Frank worked for DECOM. His injury had healed significantly, so much he could even walk without a crutch. On a sublimely tranquil evening, Bernice ruffled Sam's hair and congratulated him for acing his math test. "Well done, honey. I knew you could do it." "Thanks, Mom," said Sam. "Time for bed. Go brush your teeth," instructed Bernice. Lionel was already in bed, snoozing soundly. The kids drifted deeper into their dreams, and Bernice turned the lights out. She headed back to her and Frank's room and opened the door to find her husband intently reading the newspaper. "You beat me no fair. I had to... Oh my God. Frank." He looked up at his wife in surprise, and she stuttered and said, "There's a thing on..." She nervously pointed at her neck and then him. Frank looked down and shrieked. There was a black, alien-looking slug wiggling around his neck. It was attached firmly. "Well, now what?" Frank asked wildly. "I don't know. Wait, I have an idea. I'll get a lighter. Be right back," Bernice replied. She came back with a lighter and sparked it out of the slug-like thing. Frank groaned and it shriveled and fell to the floor. Frank fainted into the arms of a quizzical Bernice. It seemed the stewards were in charge of bringing the dead slug-like specimen to the data enforcement center the next day, not knowing how serious of a problem this was. "Interesting. This was on you? How do you feel?" asked Drew Carville. "Okay, a little tired. Why is it always me?" retorted Frank. "Frank, you do look a little under the weather. Let's get you to the doctor." "Sedate him. 12 milliliters Ativan, and make sure he snoozes. Also phone SETI. I don't know if I can do this alone," said the residing doctor firmly. SETI, or the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, was the most proficient group in dealing with alien matters. Dr. Bishop, MD, knew he had never seen anything like the specimen that was on Frank. Dr. Bishop and SETI started talking in the teleconference room. "Hi, so let us skip the pleasantries. We need to identify this revolting thing. What is it, and how do we restore our enforcer?" asked the doctor quickly. "It's a Slybon. It's native to Quas, a moon of Ares. This is not a good sign. These Slybons are famous for injecting their young into their host. I can tell you this, they don't like fire. Hotter the better to get rid of these guys," said the SETI representative. The doctor managed a thanks as he rushed back to Frank. He put the hospital bed on wheels and hustled towards the pool room. Dr. Bishop calmly reassured Frank that he was going to be okay and rolled the bed into the sauna. The doctor waited 10 minutes and the sedated Forster sat up, wild-eyed. Dr. Bishop comforted him and encouraged him to stay in the infirmary for a while. He agreed sleepily and smiled slightly. "Okay, listen up. We've got an alien race, Slybons, from the moon Quas of planet Ares. They may be initiating intergalactic war. They look like slugs and they do not like the heat. Fortunately, they are destroyed with heat or flame, and they are excreted in human waste if successfully burned up while attached to someone," roared a livid Carville, willing to go to the ends of the universe to save mankind. Of course, this would happen quite literally. Part 3. Stars. Space travel was made possible through funding allocated for the Corps. They had a mechanic working full-time on an intergalactic spaceship in the basement silo at the Data Enforcement Center. His name was Eugene Schwartz, and he was always jolly and joyful. Nate Frederick made his way to the silo. He had direct orders from Carville to expedite a mission to eliminate the root of their problems, or to at least try peace talks with the Slybons. "Hey, Eugene," shouted Nate. "Ouch," Eugene exclaimed, looking up and hanging his head on the open space bay door. "Sorry, I didn't mean to surprise you. Anyways, we have an urgent need for reaching the other side of the universe. You must have gotten the message in your pager. Can you help?" asked Nate. "Well, this puppy needs a lot of work still. I don't know if I could say that she's space-worthy yet," he said with a merry smile. "Okay, let me help. What's left?" "We need more plasma, we just do. All the fairings need painted with thermal insulator. And I could really use some company, so sure, you have a deal," he winked. "Gotcha, the phrase will be easy. Where to find plasma? Oh, I have just the thing. 1 sec. Nate rushed off to find his dimensional matter separator. It was perfect for separating the 4 states of matter from pretty much anything. He placed a cube of lead in the device and hit the separate button. It wore solid lead, liquid lead, and lead gas and lead plasma were encapsulated in a miniature vial. The type of material placed in this device was not of great concern. Results yielded were approximately the same, just with slightly different properties. Will this be enough plasma? Thought Nate. He took it to Eugene, who nodded approvingly at the vial. Eugene said a dozen or so of these would be plenty for fuel. Then a message came through their pagers. Okay, make it 3 dozen vials of lead plasma. It is the densest and creates my personal favorite type of plasma, especially made for plasma rifles, Eugene said. Ever consider holding back on the antidepressants? Nate lashed out admonishingly. Eugene frowned, wounded. Just a little info for you. I didn't mean anything by it. Sorry. I am curious. How do you do it? Stay so happy all the time. Is that normal? Nate apologized. Eugene laughed uproariously and then said seriously, You know I am human too. I have mixed feelings sometimes, but I love what I do. For me, positivity is everything. Nate groaned, half smiling, and the duo took a seat at the drawing board to make a packing list. It took a while, and that was with an entire pot of coffee. As the clock ticks toward liftoff, the final draft will look something like this. Eugene slid over a copy, an immense laundry list of stuff. Well, where do you think we're going? The other side of the universe? Nate joked. Eugene laughed and said, No, really, I think this will work. 20 of the best data enforcers and recruits were chosen to adopt this mission. They were screened by doctors prior to the liftoff, of which included a psychological evaluation to gauge their readiness and aptitude for intergalactic travel. Liftoff was easy. They shot perpetually faster into the sky, and then they were in space. Navigation displays and controls littered the cockpit like anxiously drawn graffiti. The pilot motioned to the lightspeed opportunity. Frank, now nursed back to health, nodded and sat down with the rest of the motley crew as the fasten seatbelt lights came on. Gradually nudging the spacecraft into lightspeed, the pilot engaged gravity control pressure. This should compensate for the extreme distances traveled almost instantaneously, moving like a photon, and a very large photon at that. They landed on Quas, the moon, and were immediately greeted by a dozen or so aliens. Slybons were known to be very extortionate in their demands being met. They wiggled ominously towards the crew and began to speak in an alien language. They said something that was most closely translated to English as, What doing here? We no like. The Slybons were initially hesitant of these people's grand entrance. Confusion broke out as the field agent stopped, realizing these creatures had only a very rudimentary understanding of communication. They said something else that translated to, We come in peace, just curious as to what you are doing here in the universe that brings peace. DECOM issued a warning over the team's radios that the Slybons could be lying and to relinquish their weapons. Out of remorse, the team repented and apologized profusely for stepping on the lunar landing. They set their weapons down on the Martian soil and bowed ostentatiously to the now smiling Martians. They briefly went over the mission and collaborated with and listened to the human people's viewpoints about their peacemaking efforts. The aliens cleared their throats loudly and spoke up. We hereby offer a peace treaty with you humans. We are proud to offer our undying support. However, our queen may think otherwise. Let us take you to her, a leader said. The strange cluster of alien beings escorted the data enforcers to a huge queen of her people, who wiggled ceremoniously. Greetings and welcome, people of Earth and Moon. Let us begin. Your demise for killing my people. Frank knew the truth and the whole story behind why humans killed so many Slybon aliens. The aliens to humans were known as being divided, with the majority being ruthless assassins. They are most well known for their extensive exploits in assassinating key human politicians who were entrusted with creating a global government on Earth. Slybons didn't think human civilizations were advanced enough yet technologically to facilitate and keep up with intergalactic relations with extraterrestrials across the universe. In this way, the once sprawling political agenda to govern the Earth by humans was just about nullified. By simply attaching smaller juvenile Slybons to a human's neck, and without immediate medical attention, the Queen carried out hundreds of assassinations on respectable and innocent humans. Her henchmen were the sneakiest, fitting into almost any crack or crevice to evade detection. Without notice, the Queen started summoning Slybon after Slybon from the mucous membrane ground. The group of assailants roared, and Earth's interplanetary liaisons opened fire and torched every alien in sight with plasma rifles and thermal lances. They got to the Queen and didn't give her a chance as they shoved the lances into her belly. She let out a loud groan and shriveled into ash as flames engulfed her. Frank Blankton was brought back to reality by the needs of his team. Several of them suffered injections of alien hatchlings due to the parasitic nature of these aliens. The alien invaders who greeted the dead enforcers were waiting behind them. The aliens gurgled, which was translated by the human translator to, "Hooray, you saved us." This friendly bunch of aliens thanked the humans profusely and wiggled back into the ground of the moon. The Corps loaded back into the Arbiter as they named their spacecraft and went over the takeoff checklist. Teammates fanned the group's casualties with plasma mist to get rid of their Slybon hatchling infections, increasing their body temperature as safely as possible. Thrusters on, Arbiter disengaged the landing struts and zoomed away into deep space. They landed in New York on a late evening in September. A major problem then surfaced. The clock showed the year 9772 AD. Even weirder than being 6,000 years into the future was the sheer amount of water covering the planet. Previous streets were now deep canals, and boats littered the waterways. Algae and sea foam twisted up the sides of buildings. Then, while looking through the Arbiter's windows, they saw a massive surge of bubbles from the shoreline. A giant robotic dragon delivered an ear-piercing scream and sent a small tsunami inland. It sank back into the seas with a menacing gaze, its eyes glowing a sickly green. Part 4. Technophobia. Aquabots, which they became colloquially known as, had inhabited Earth in the early 9000s. Rather sordidly, Aquabots overpowered Earthlings and eventually enslaved the entire human race. They had psychic attack abilities but kept to the water since they were completely anaerobic, and it was discovered that these aquatic robots were deathly allergic to oxygen. Created by heaps of e-waste collected on the seafloor, they were roughly cobbled together and took on infinite forms. Some higher-ups in their hierarchy slowly raised water levels to trap human beings wherever they were. Using psychic powers, they preyed on the morally weak as these people were the most vulnerable. It was not the worst-case scenario for most. Many were glad that the arrival of the Aquabots reduced terrorism, crime, and the immoral. On the other hand, cons were apparent from the robotic race's notoriety for being drug lords. These creatures used drugs to hone their psychic abilities. The most common one used by humans and robots was named FOG. FOG stood for fear of gain, and the effects ranged from any fearful feeling to feeling invincible for a short time. The Corps dropped Arbiter into the silo, weighing info updates coming from DECOM. They made their way to the office and found the place bustling. Business as usual. Over the din of the phones ringing and people talking, Keto Wynn introduced himself and called for everyone to be quiet. He began to talk about how we were 60 generations into the future, and reassured them that Arbiter's lightspeed generator had malfunctioned and worked at wasteful speeds, causing so much time to pass. Luckily, the life support worked and kept everyone alive and breathing, not aging more than a week or so. The black box at the Data Enforcement Center kept records, communications, and navigation beacons up and running for Arbiter and its space crew. Data Enforcers started a new mission. Everyone split up and commenced readying submarine schematics in the underwater subbay and going over scuba diving refreshers in the pool. The submarine was bright orange, named Oasis, and over 40 meters in length. It had a dry dock on the top for its jet skis. A trapdoor laid flush on the bottom to launch diving expeditions from. It was outfitted with every bell and whistle available, and to sustain a crew of 20 for over a month, there was a tiny nuclear reactor on board. The trickiest part of the mission, crew members agreed, was going to be combat. Seemingly immune to conventional weaponry, the Aquabots had just one Achilles tendon: air. Decisions were made, and the crew chose to repurpose a snowblower into a giant oxygen generator. Strapping oxygen tanks to its base for a special attack, they tapped off the oxygen tanks and connected the generator to the main oxygen lines in the submarine. With adding inline industrial fans and a connecting nozzle that protruded from one of the torpedo bays, the team had weaponized air. Deploying Oasis had a few hiccups. After leaving the secret underwater tunnel which led to the ocean via a drainage pipe, the sub kept bonding out on the seafloor and the exterior floodlights flickered for a while and then went out completely. Nate and Frank donned scuba gear, wetsuits, and oxygen tanks and headed to the trapdoor in the lower quarters. Slipping into the small airlock, they gave the thumbs-up sign to each other to signal that they were ready. Frank cranked the lever on the wall close to the top door and let water in. At first, they floated halfway up the room as the water level went over their heads to the ceiling. The lower door opened and they could just hope and pray that what lurked in the deep, deep waters wouldn't bother them. Frank and Nate plunged into the blue sea beneath Oasis and screwed new halogen bulbs into the floodlight housings. Then the pair heard a deafening low-frequency hum and saw some bubbles rise up around them. Metal talons twisted up from the depths and snatched Nate, dragging him deeper. Frank scrambled to the airlock door and heard a radio transmission from DECOM. "We have some weird noise on the sonar. Recommend returning to airlock. Do you copy?" Frank was sucked up into the airlock. As the water receded and drained from the small room, he couldn't help but to worry about Nate. He paced nervously and climbed up the ladder when the water was gone. He relayed the bad news, and the team was quiet for a moment before deciding to send and require their Nate. They made their way going under the surface. The next step was to get past the front gate of the robotic fortress. They agreed that the best option was to use a torpedo. Oasis oriented its bow to the center of the gate, an amalgam of cyber debris. The nuclear submarine launched their torpedo and it bubbled towards its target. It imploded, destroying the gate. Mermaid-looking robots holding spears appeared in front of them. They had Nate clenched tightly in their robotic grasp. Fortunately, he still had some air in his scuba tank and gave the out-of-her hand signal, drawing a line across his neck. The path to the robot lair grew narrower, forcing the core out of Oasis and onto water scooters. Now the only remaining task was to cut off the head of the snake by destroying the robot dragon, and to escape. Descending further into the lair and leaving Oasis near the entrance, the brave core members were met with an eerie green glow emanating from a cave opening. They jetted past the opening and found the robot dragon. The divers hatched a plan. It was a courageous attack of them to employ. Half of the divers began buddy breathing or sharing air with the other half. They then used a tank wrench to start unscrewing half of their oxygen tanks. Aiming the tanks at the dragon, who was unusually calm, the caps came off and flew towards the head of the sea monster. The tanks left their enforcers' hands so quickly that they were embedded in the enormous dragon's mouth. The pressurized air tanks released their contents and the robot boss exploded. Everyone hustled out of the cave. The blast from the dragon exploding traveled through the underwater lair and carried the good guys straight to Oasis. They made it home safely and environmental restoration efforts commenced immediately. Earth was safe, much thanks to DECOM and its noble stewardship of this planet. Peace and sovereignty reigned once again, and the enforcers could rest easy, knowing they did their best. And it worked. Epilogue. I would like to dedicate this book to my family, Rob, Jen, Zach, and Kate. Thanks to them, I'm doing what I do best, writing books and exploring the world of fiction. Thank you.